What if I told you the world has been quietly outsmarted, and no one even noticed? India has been moving in silence, rewriting the rules of power, technology, and global influence while the rest of the world assumed they were still in control. From secret alliances to groundbreaking innovations, from invisible strategies to unmatched foresight, every move has been calculated to perfection. By the time the world realizes what is happening, it might already be too late. In this video, we break down how India has not just caught up but is quietly reshaping the global order, leaving even America and the world stunned. The studio lights felt hotter than usual. Piers Morgan sat forward in his chair. His fingers tightened around the stack of notes. Across from him, the analyst did not blink. A large screen behind them glowed with maps, charts, and quiet warnings. The audience shifted in their seats. Something unexpected was unfolding. Piers cleared his throat. The air carried a faint hum of electricity and tension. He glanced at the screen again. India's numbers kept rising. Manufacturing surged. Technology leaped forward. Defense partnerships rewrote old equations. The room felt smaller. A producer whispered urgently through the earpiece. Piers felt a strange pressure behind his eyes. This was not the script he expected. The analyst leaned closer to the microphone. His voice stayed calm. Come. He spoke of silent diplomacy. Of deals signed quietly while the world looked elsewhere. Of satellites launched as markets slept. Of data flowing east while assumptions stayed west. Piers shifted in his seat. The polished desk felt cold under his palms. A murmur spread through the audience. Some faces showed disbelief. Others showed concern. The screen changed again. Trade routes glowed red. Supply chains bent like steel under heat. America's familiar advantages looked thinner, less certain. Piers swallowed. He remembered past interviews. The confidence. The certainty of dominance. That certainty now cracked. The analyst described strategy layered over patience. Decades, not years. Moves made without noise. Power gathered without announcement. The studio lights flickered for a split second. No one laughed. No one breathed easily. Piers felt a chill despite the heat. This was not competition. This was positioning. The analyst paused. Then revealed the final chart. A projection stretching far into the future. The room went silent. Piers stared at the screen. His reflection stared back, unsettled. The realization settled slowly. The world order was not shifting. It was already different. And the next move was already in motion. The silence in the studio felt heavier than the lights overhead. Piers's mind raced, tracing back every headline he had read, every confident prediction he had made. Every assumption now looked fragile. The analyst did not smile. His gaze remained steady, almost piercing. He began describing India's quiet mastery of technology. Artificial intelligence integrated into industries faster than anyone anticipated. Startups blooming like hidden gardens in cities the world often ignored. Energy projects harnessing sun and wind with precision that left older powers scrambling to catch up. The screen flickered, showing satellite images of ports and factories, all humming with activity. Piers's pulse accelerated. He could feel the tension knotting in his stomach. It was one thing to read numbers. Another to see them visualized in real time. The analyst spoke of education reforms, skill building, and an innovation culture that outpaced bureaucracy. Of a nation learning from mistakes, but quietly, decisively, almost invisibly. Piers leaned closer, gripping the edge of the desk. The room seemed to shrink with each passing chart. Global powers had relied on assumptions of supremacy. But India had played a long, careful game. The analyst then shifted the discussion to defense. No bluster. No theatrics. Just precision and foresight. Missiles, satellites, and cyber capabilities all synchronized. The screen now displayed a network of strategic outposts, each node pulsing with silent influence. Piers's breathing became shallow. A knot of unease twisted in his chest. America's traditional dominance felt less like a fortress and more like an echo. The analyst's voice remained steady, almost hypnotic. He spoke of diplomacy conducted in shadows, agreements inked quietly, while the media debated trivialities. Borders, trade routes, even space exploration were being subtly reshaped. Piers could hear the faint tapping of his own heartbeat in his ears. The studio temperature did not change, but sweat dotted his brow. Every instinct screamed that the world he knew was quietly being rewritten. The analyst revealed projections of India's economic influence stretching decades ahead. Charts interlocked like a puzzle the world had ignored. Investments flowing into technology, healthcare, and infrastructure like hidden rivers beneath familiar terrain. Global corporations pivoting without realizing their alignment had shifted. Piers's hands trembled slightly as he lifted a pen to jot notes. Felt surreal. The familiar narrative of power and dominance no longer fit the reality on the screen. Then came the section on intelligence and information. Data streams, cybersecurity, research collaboration. All synchronized in ways the West barely noticed. The analyst emphasized patience. A patient strategy, waiting for the precise moment to reveal strength. The screen now showed a network of alliances that seemed invisible, yet unbreakable. Piers leaned back, his chair creaking under the sudden weight of comprehension. Every headline he had scoffed at suddenly made sense. Every surprise India had delivered in tech, defense, and diplomacy coalesced into a pattern he could not ignore. The room seemed to hum with quiet tension, almost as if the walls themselves were aware of the shift. The analyst paused, letting the weight of the information sink. Piers's throat tightened. He realized that this was more than competition. It was a transformation of global hierarchy, a careful, deliberate reshaping of influence and power. And it was happening without fanfare, without chaos, without notice. The world assumed disruption would be loud, visible, chaotic. India had proved otherwise. It was silent. It was strategic. It was unstoppable. Piers's reflection on the screen no longer seemed like his own. It seemed like a mirror of uncertainty and awe. The chart shifted one final time, showing projections that stretched decades forward. The implications were staggering. The room remained silent. Even the audience, once restless, held their breath. This was not speculation. This was evidence. India had quietly outmaneuvered assumptions, outpaced predictions, outsmarted the world. Piers could feel the shock reverberate in his chest. The lights felt blinding. The hum of equipment seemed louder. The weight of reality pressed against him. And in that instant he understood. Everything had changed. The balance of power was no longer predictable. And the world had barely noticed. The screen pulsed, showing India at the center of an invisible web. Every line a strategy, every node a victory yet unannounced. Piers could no longer separate fear from admiration. The slow, methodical brilliance was undeniable. He felt a cold clarity settle over him. The world had been outsmarted, quietly, efficiently, and there was no turning back. The analyst's voice was calm, almost detached. Yet every word carried the weight of inevitability. Piers realized he was witnessing history being quietly rewritten. The audience remained frozen, sensing the shift but unable to articulate it. Outside the studio, the world continued unaware. But within these walls, a revelation had landed, and it would not be forgotten. The story of India's rise was not loud. It was subtle, it was relentless, and it was unstoppable. Piers felt the gravity fully then, the realization that dominance no longer belonged to the expected powers. It belonged to the patient, the strategic, the invisible force that moved with precision. India. And the world had been caught off guard. The room stayed quiet, the lights glaring, the screens glowing. Every heartbeat seemed to echo the same truth. The future had shifted, quietly but irreversibly, and there was no immediate way to stop it. Piers exhaled slowly, his voice caught between disbelief and awe. This was more than news. It was an awakening. The world had underestimated a quiet force. A force that had been learning, planning, and outsmarting for decades. Every assumption he had made was now in question. Every narrative rewritten. And the question lingered in the air, heavy and unavoidable. How long before the world fully realized what had already changed? The analyst's eyes held his calm certainty. The answer was clear. But when it came, it would be too late to ignore. Piers looked at the screen again, feeling the unsettling clarity seep deeper. India was no longer playing catch-up. India was leading. And the world, including America, had been quietly outmaneuvered. A subtle smile flickered across the analyst's face. It was not arrogance. It was inevitability. Piers swallowed hard. He knew the world would struggle to understand what he had just witnessed. And in that struggle, India's advantage would only grow. The hum of the equipment, the glow of the screens, the heat of the lights, they all pressed in, reminding him of one undeniable fact. The rules of global power had changed. And he had just seen the blueprint. The room stayed still. Time seemed to slow. History had quietly pivoted. And Piers Morgan, like the rest of the world, had just glimpsed the beginning of a new order. India was already ahead. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The studio lights no longer felt like lights. They felt like spotlights on a revelation that the world had ignored. Piers shifted in his chair, feeling the weight of every statistic, every projection, every silent maneuver laid bare before him. The analyst leaned back, eyes calm, yet every movement deliberate, as though the room itself were part of a strategy. Outside, traffic moved, oblivious. News channels debated trivialities. Markets reacted to headlines that missed the underlying currents. But inside the studio, the currents were visible, undeniable. The screen now displayed a map of influence that stretched far beyond borders. Economic corridors, technological hubs, strategic alliances, all interwoven in a network that seemed almost organic. Piers's mind traced the lines, trying to grasp their scale. Each connection represented months, years, even decades of planning. A quiet revolution unfolding under the radar. The analyst spoke again. His voice a calm cadence that made every word feel heavier. He described India's mastery of energy independence, its advances in AI, biotech, and space technology. How satellite constellations silently monitored climate, trade, and security. How supply chains had been rewired to bypass traditional choke points. Each revelation felt like a piece of a puzzle Piers did not want to complete but could not ignore. The audience leaned forward. Even the camera crew paused, sensing the gravity. Piers realized the scale of what he was seeing. America's assumptions of dominance, Europe's confidence in their established systems. They all seemed naive now. India had not only caught up, they had quietly rewritten the rules. The analyst's tone shifted slightly. He spoke of diplomacy conducted with precision, surgical in its execution. Allies and adversaries alike moved, unaware of the subtle nudges shaping their choices. It was not confrontation. It was strategy perfected over generations. Piers's throat felt dry. He reached for his water glass but did not drink. His attention could not afford a single distraction. The screen displayed global trade patterns, overlaid with Indian technological influence. Ports once considered secondary now pulsed with activity. Emerging industries bore India's mark, quietly dominating sectors previously thought untouchable. The audience whispered among themselves, realizing the depth of what was unfolding. Piers glanced at the analyst, who now pointed to a projection decades into the future. It was staggering. Markets shifted. Military capabilities synchronized. Economic influence stretched like an invisible web across continents. Every line, every node, a testament to patience and strategy. Piers felt a chill creep up his spine. The weight of reality pressed down. This was more than news. This was an unveiling of a new global order. India's rise was not flashy. It was silent, calculated, unstoppable. He realized the discomfort he felt was not fear of loss but recognition. Recognition that the assumptions of the world were flawed. That dominance was no longer guaranteed. And that power now lay in patience, in strategy, in foresight. The analyst's eyes met Piers's, calm and unwavering. He spoke of influence achieved without spectacle. Of victories so quiet that the world would only recognize them when it was too late. Every projection on the screen was a testament to that. Piers felt an unsettling admiration. And a twinge of panic. The realization settled fully. The global stage was being redefined in real time. India's hand was invisible but decisive. The lights, once a mere background, now seemed almost accusatory. They illuminated a truth too complex, too strategic for conventional understanding. Outside, life continued, oblivious. Inside, the world had already shifted. The analyst described next-generation technologies, supply chain mastery, and financial strategies that would ensure sustained influence. Every detail seemed to anticipate the moves of other powers before they themselves realized. Piers felt his hands tremble slightly. Not from fear, but from the immensity of comprehension. The audience sat frozen. No one spoke. No one dared move. It was as if the air itself had thickened. The screen now showed interlinked spheres of influence. Trade, defense, technology, and diplomacy. Every sphere overlapped, reinforcing the other. Piers traced the lines, understanding at last that this was not just national strategy. This was orchestration of power across every domain. A quiet, relentless, almost invisible symphony of strategy. The hum of studio equipment seemed louder now. Every chart, every map, every projection screamed inevitability. The world had assumed noise and spectacle defined influence. India had proven that subtlety and foresight were far more powerful. Piers's chest tightened. He realized history was being written in whispers. In calculated steps, unnoticed moves, patient execution. The analyst spoke of the next decade. Then the next two, revealing a trajectory that would make dominance seem natural, inevitable, unstoppable. The room seemed to vibrate with quiet tension. The audience's awe was palpable. Piers's voice caught as he tried to formulate a response. Words felt inadequate. The scale of planning, the patience, the precision. It dwarfed any single event, any sudden triumph. The analyst's final words resonated. Influence achieved quietly is influence that lasts forever. Piers leaned back, absorbing the full weight of that truth. The world outside the studio remained unchanged, unaware. Inside, the foundations of global power had been quietly, meticulously, irrevocably shifted. India was no longer chasing. It was leading. And the world had only begun to realize the magnitude. Every heartbeat, every pulse, every glance at the glowing screens reminded Piers that the assumptions of yesterday no longer applied. He felt a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the awareness of being an observer to history, seeing the invisible become undeniable. The analyst smiled faintly. It was not triumph. It was certainty. And Piers knew, in that instant, that the story of global dominance had been rewritten. And the world had been outplayed in silence. The studio remained still, the screens pulsing softly, the air thick with tension. And yet, even in this calm, a storm of change was already sweeping across continents, unseen but unstoppable. Piers Morgan understood fully now. Nothing would ever be the same again. The quiet brilliance of India's strategy had done what the world thought impossible. It had outsmarted, outpaced, and outlasted expectation. And the next chapter was already underway. The room felt almost suspended in time. Every eye fixed on the glowing screens, yet no one dared speak. Piers Morgan's mind raced, connecting dots that had always seemed isolated, irrelevant, or harmless. Now they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. The analyst continued, voice steady, almost hypnotic. He spoke of technology corridors stretching from Bengaluru to the smallest industrial hubs. Of research institutions quietly surpassing the West. Of intellectual property quietly shifting ownership, patents filed strategically, innovation blossoming in silence. Piers felt a pang of disbelief. He had covered global news for decades. He had interviewed CEOs, generals, and world leaders. Yet nothing had prepared him for the scale of what he was witnessing. The screen now displayed cyber infrastructure, its tendrils weaving across continents. India's influence infiltrated sectors without confrontation, without aggression, but with unerring precision. Every node a potential game-changer, every connection invisible but consequential. Piers's breathing became shallow. The studio air, thick with tension, seemed to press against his skin. The analyst described diplomatic maneuvers so subtle that allies of America remained unaware of their shifted priorities. Trade deals quietly aligned with Indian interests. Strategic partnerships formed under the radar. Even military alliances subtly realigned. Piers realized these were not isolated victories. They were part of an invisible strategy spanning decades. A patient orchestration of global influence. He felt a chill, not of fear, but of recognition. The world's assumptions about power, speed, and influence were being systematically dismantled. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the magnitude. Even the cameras, trained on Piers, seemed to capture the gravity in the room. The analyst spoke of space technology, describing satellites not merely for observation, but for control of data, trade monitoring, and early warning systems. Piers's heart beat faster. The scope was overwhelming. India had quietly mastered arenas the world assumed it would take decades to enter. The projection shifted, revealing economic dominance subtly disguised in diversified industries. Manufacturing hubs, software centers, energy projects, research labs. All integrated, forming an ecosystem the world had ignored. Piers's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his notes. This was not just a rise of a nation. This was the redefinition of influence itself. The analyst now highlighted strategic patience. How moves were timed perfectly, executed quietly, yet devastating in their effectiveness. The world measured power by noise. India measured power by precision. And that precision was unstoppable. Piers's reflection on the screen no longer felt familiar. It mirrored a world grappling with a truth too big, too fast, too deliberate to process. The analyst continued, showing projections decades ahead. India's influence stretched like invisible threads across global finance, trade, technology, and security. Each thread reinforced another, creating a web impossible to dismantle. Piers leaned forward, trying to absorb it all. The room felt electric, though no wire sparked. Even the hum of equipment seemed louder, charged with the weight of revelation. The analyst then described energy independence, technological self-sufficiency, and a network of intelligence so integrated that global rivals could only react. Every chart, every statistic, every map told the same story. India was not playing catch-up. It was leading, quietly, methodically, and decisively. Piers swallowed hard, his voice catching when he finally spoke. He realized the story he had thought he knew, the narrative of Western dominance, of predictable geopolitics, was obsolete. The analyst's calm, measured explanation contrasted sharply with the storm of realization building inside Piers. He felt awe, admiration, and unease at once. The audience sat frozen, some whispering, others staring at screens as if they could absorb the strategy through sight alone. Piers's chest tightened. The future he thought he understood no longer existed. It had been quietly redesigned. And the architect of that design was India. The analyst's final points were clear. Patience, subtlety, integration, and foresight. Moves made quietly, victories achieved silently, influence consolidated invisibly. The room seemed to vibrate with inevitability. Piers leaned back in disbelief. Outside, the world continued its rhythms, unaware of the shift beneath its feet. Inside, the foundations of global power had been subtly, irreversibly altered. The projection on the screen now showed an interconnected web, linking technology, defense, economics, and diplomacy with flawless precision. Piers's mind struggled to comprehend the scale, the foresight, the meticulous planning. It was not just a rise of a nation, it was a redefinition of global influence. And the world had been caught off guard. No one had seen the patient, invisible hand shaping outcomes. No one had anticipated the orchestration of decades in silent motion. Piers felt a shiver crawl across his spine. Every assumption he had relied on now seemed fragile, outdated, even naive. The analyst spoke of alliances forged without headlines, trade deals executed without notice, and influence accumulated like water quietly eroding stone. The strategy was silent, yet unstoppable. Piers realized that even the most powerful nations were merely playing roles in a narrative written elsewhere. The audience sensed it too. A quiet awe filled the room, mingled with unease. The analyst's final chart projected decades ahead, showing India at the center of a network that had yet to fully reveal itself to the world. The magnitude of the revelation was almost unbearable. Piers felt the weight of history pressing down. He knew that the world would soon awaken to a truth it could not unsee. And when it did, the advantages India had cultivated in silence would already be unassailable. Every instinct in Piers screamed the same truth. The world's rules had changed. India was no longer following. It was quietly, relentlessly, and decisively leading. The lights seemed brighter, the screens hotter, the air heavier. Every heartbeat in the studio echoed the inevitability of what had already been set in motion. Piers Morgan understood then. History had quietly pivoted, and the world had only just begun to notice. India's rise was unstoppable, invisible, and complete. The reality settled over him like a wave. The game had already changed. The world had been outsmarted. And nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the studio lingered, heavy and unbroken. Piers Morgan felt it pressing against him, a weight that seemed almost physical. He had reported on shifts in power, predicted trends, and debated global strategy for decades. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have. The analyst leaned forward slightly, calm and deliberate. His hands rested on the desk, yet every word he spoke seemed to reshape the air around them. He described India's mastery of infrastructure, its ability to integrate rural innovation with urban technology. Every city, every town, every research hub was a cog in a machine moving silently, efficiently, relentlessly. Piers traced the lines on the screen, noticing patterns he had never seen before. It was as if India had created an entire parallel network of power, invisible to the casual observer. Economic corridors, defense networks, intelligence operations, trade partnerships, all synchronized with a precision that made even the most sophisticated global power seem reactive. Piers swallowed hard, feeling a cold surge of realization. This was not a temporary advantage. It was systemic, built over decades, and carefully hidden in plain sight. The analyst's tone shifted slightly, drawing the room's attention further. He spoke of energy projects harnessing solar, wind, and nuclear with unprecedented efficiency. How the nation had quietly become a global hub for renewable energy technology, exporting knowledge, expertise, and equipment around the world. The screen displayed factories, research labs, and energy facilities, glowing faintly as if alive. Every location represented innovation, every connection reinforced another. Piers felt the room shrink around him. He was not just observing. He was experiencing the culmination of a strategy decades in the making. The analyst continued, now addressing technology and cybersecurity. India's AI research had reached levels that rivaled, even surpassed, Western expectations. Cyber capabilities ensured that critical information, supply chains, and digital infrastructure were protected and influenced with subtlety and precision. It was influence without aggression, power without spectacle. Piers's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his notes. Even as a seasoned journalist, he felt the enormity of the moment. Outside, the world remained oblivious. Inside, reality had quietly shifted. The analyst's voice carried across the studio, calm and unwavering. He explained how India's education system had been quietly redesigned to produce not only workers but innovators and strategists capable of operating in complex global systems. The nation was cultivating talent faster, smarter, and more efficiently than anyone else. Piers leaned forward, trying to absorb every detail. The realization struck him fully. Every success, every technological breakthrough, every strategic alliance was part of a deliberate plan spanning decades. It was patience incarnate. The audience could feel the tension. Some whispered. Others simply stared, frozen in comprehension. The analyst's final charts now displayed an intricate web of global influence. Trade flows, defense alliances, energy partnerships, technology leadership, all centered on India. The connections were subtle yet undeniable. Piers's chest tightened. He realized the implications. Traditional centers of power were no longer dominant. They were reacting to a force they had barely noticed. And the more he looked, the clearer it became that India's rise was not just about economics or technology. It was about strategy, foresight, and an almost invisible orchestration of global influence. The analyst paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. Piers could feel the gravity pressing in. The rules had changed, silently, decisively, irreversibly. Every heartbeat in the studio seemed to echo the truth. India was no longer competing. India was orchestrating. And the world, including America, had been caught unaware. The analyst's eyes reflected quiet certainty. He spoke of alliances formed without headlines, deals executed in shadows, influence accumulated without spectacle. It was a power that could not be challenged openly, only responded to quietly. Piers felt a mixture of awe and unease. The world had underestimated patience. It had underestimated foresight. It had underestimated India. The screen now displayed projections decades into the future. Every line, every node, every connection represented influence quietly achieved, yet impossible to ignore. Piers realized history was unfolding before him, silently, meticulously, and with unstoppable momentum. He understood that global assumptions, long-held certainties, and perceived hierarchies were being rewritten in real time. The analyst's voice was calm, almost meditative, yet every word carried the weight of inevitability. Piers's reflection stared back at him, pale and tense, mirroring the realization that nothing would ever be the same. India had moved from being a follower to a quiet architect of global order. Every market, every policy, every alliance was subtly realigned. Every move was deliberate. Every victory was silent. The studio remained still, but Piers felt the vibrations of change reverberating in the air. The analyst spoke of the next generation of leaders, innovators, and strategists emerging from India's educational and technological ecosystems. They would carry forward the strategy, extending influence across continents with precision and patience. Piers realized this was not a momentary advantage. This was a legacy in motion. Every heartbeat, every chart, every projection on the screen testified to the inevitability of India's influence. Piers exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly as understanding settled in. Yet the awe and the unease remained. He had witnessed a transformation that few could fully comprehend. The world had been quietly outmaneuvered, and India's rise was unstoppable, patient, and invisible. The lights of the studio seemed brighter now, almost accusatory. They illuminated a truth that the world was only beginning to perceive. The analyst's final words resonated like a quiet drumbeat. Influence achieved silently is power that endures. Piers understood fully, and with a shiver, he realized that history itself had been rewritten. The narrative of global dominance was no longer predictable. It had been quietly redesigned by a force the world had underestimated: India. And the consequences of that subtle, relentless rise would echo across generations. Piers's reflection lingered on the screen, pale, tense, yet fully aware. The world had been outsmarted, silently, methodically, and irrevocably. The story of power had changed, and the next chapter was already underway. Piers Morgan leaned back, finally letting the enormity of what he had witnessed settle in. The studio, once tense with anticipation, felt almost quiet now, as if it too was absorbing the weight of revelation. He glanced at the analyst, whose calm composure seemed almost unshakable. Everything had been laid bare: the silent strategies, the patient orchestration, the invisible network of influence stretching across the world. And yet there was no triumphalism, no fanfare, only the quiet certainty that history had shifted. Piers understood now that India's rise was not about dominance in the conventional sense. It was about mastery of patience, about vision executed flawlessly over decades, about reshaping the rules while the world slept. He felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. The world would catch up eventually. But for now, India had quietly outmaneuvered expectation, intelligence and power. The lights in the studio dimmed slightly, the glow of the screens casting soft shadows. Piers looked at the maps, the charts, the projections, and realized that this story was not about fear or rivalry. It was about understanding. A lesson in foresight, resilience, and strategy. The audience exhaled collectively, sensing the gravity of the revelation. Outside, the world continued unaware, but inside, Piers knew one thing clearly. The future belonged to those who moved with patience, purpose, and precision. And India had shown how to do it quietly, brilliantly, and irrevocably. He straightened in his chair, the weight of comprehension giving way to clarity. The story had been told, but its consequences would unfold far beyond the walls of the studio. The world would adjust, new narratives would emerge, and history would remember this moment, not as a loud clash, but as the quiet turning of a tide that no one saw coming. Piers Morgan exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body. And with that, the episode ended, leaving a world forever changed, and a story that would echo for generations to come. What if I told you the world has been quietly outsmarted, and no one even noticed? India has been moving in silence, rewriting the rules of power, technology, and global influence while the rest of the world assumed they were still in control. From secret alliances to groundbreaking innovations, from invisible strategies to unmatched foresight, every move has been calculated to perfection. By the time the world realizes what is happening, it might already be too late. In this video, we break down how India has not just caught up but is quietly reshaping the global order, leaving even America and the world stunned.